Hello and welcome back to the 500 workshop. So today we're going to be looking at the engine bay of a Fiat 500. Now we're going to be looking at the engine bay of a Fiat 500L, but this is fitted with a 650cc engine from the 126. But everything you see is pretty much the same, and if there are any differences we'll explain what they are. So come join me at the back of the 500 where we can take a look at the engine. And here we have our engine. So this is a 650cc engine from a Fiat 126, which has replaced the original engine in this car, originally being a 499. The engine to look at is almost identical in every way. There are differences, but to the casual observer you'd struggle to know. And we're going to go through and look at all the elements on the engine and talk a little bit about each of them. Before we go into the engine though, this piece up here, so with all the holes in here, this is our air intake. So do not put loads of badges on it or do anything to block that. It's really important on an air-cooled engine that that is there and that air is able to get into it. That air comes down into the engine through this big pipe at the back. So you can see where it's attached to the body there, and the air is sucked into that big pipe. So in here, and this is our tinware on the engine, to the left side of the engine, just looking at it, is a fan. And the fan is doing two things. One, it's cooling the engine block, but also it's forcing air up into this chamber here, where we have a air filter inside of here. And that air filter, the air comes up through that air filter along here and down into our carburetor. Now our fan is powered by our alternator or dynamo. Now on this engine this is an alternator, but on my Fiat 500F we have a dynamo. We're not going to go into the details of the differences between those right now, but they both charge the battery and they drive the fan. And they drive the fan from this pulley here, which is has our nice drive belt, and goes onto a pulley that's on the engine. And as the engine rotates, that is driving this wheel on the alternator, charging the battery, but also moving the fan. While we're down in this area of the engine, we also have our fuel pump. Now this is a manual fuel pump that's driven by the engine. So there is a rod which comes from this side of the fuel pump into the engine block, and as the engine turns, that turns the rod, which turns the pump, and fuel is taken from the front of the car all the way underneath through these pipes up and driven into our carburetor. So this is our carburetor just here, this thing. We're not going to go into too much detail on that now, but this is where our air and fuel gets mixed. So air incoming the top, and fuel coming around the back here. If we just see that, it goes into the carburetor. And on this carburetor you've also got attached to it your accelerator and your choke. So those two things can influence the air-fuel mix to help you start the car and help you drive the car. So here we have our spark plugs just behind the carburetor. This is cylinder 1 and the one at the back is the cylinder 2. And here we have our high tension leads which are plugged into here. High tension leads go off to the coil and the distributor, which we'll see in a moment. We talked about the belts and the two pulleys down by the alternator, and before we switch to the other side of the engine, you can see just in here this silver piece here, and that is your oil filter. So the oil filter is actually not like a normal filter on other cars. This here uses centrifugal force to force the force the oil and the dirt that's within it into that cap. And that needs cleaning out at regular intervals. You need to make sure that's kept clean, otherwise the oil filter doesn't work and you can get clogged up. Here we have the mount for the engine. So this mount is on the rear cross member of the car, and there's a spring, a compressed spring under that mount, which mounts the engine to that rear cross member. We then come on to the main parts of the engine block. So here you have the rocker cover, and under here you have the rockers, and that goes into the head of the engine, which is this bit at the top here. Coming off the head of the engine, you've got the exhaust outlets. So you've got one this side, and because it's 2 cylinders, you have one around the back as well. So that's where the exhaust gases are coming out of. And staying with our rocker cover, we've just got a breather pipe coming off this rocker cover. That pipe goes from the rocker back round to our airbox just here. Down the bottom here we have our main block. Within this casing here we've got our timing chain and our oil pump. So if we want access to those, they're within that area of the engine. And underneath the car we can see our sump. So that's attached to the engine block with bolts. But that's where our engine oil sits and where it gets cooled as it's in operation. To the right of the engine we've got our thermostat housing. So as the engine warms up, it actually opens a flap. You can just see the edge of the flap down here. That flap opens up as the engine warms up, and that allows more air to circulate and more heat to escape. So going back to our high tension leads, these go across the rocker cover and down past the thermostat housing and into our distributor. So our distributor is our device that's actually sending the sparks to our spark plugs back up here. We will explore in detail at some point how that actually does that, and that's also connected to our coil, and there's our coil. Now the coil pack can be mounted in different places on the 500s. In this car it's over the right side of the engine bay. In my 500F it's to the left of my engine bay, so you could actually find it down by the air filter here. At the back of the engine on the right hand side we have what's called the conveyor hose. So it's another kind of big chunky hose, and that's taking the warm air of the engine and putting it into the car so that on cold days you can have heating in the car. So these two items are going to be a little bit trickier to show. Let's see if we can manage to do it. There we have it. You can just see in there behind the scenes you've got a wire, a kind of dark green black wire going into the engine. That is where the oil pressure sensor is. So that's sending your oil pressure back to your dashboard to let you know you've got oil pressure, or whether you got too low oil pressure. And just down here also, just by the distributor, we've got our dipstick for taking our oil level readings. We've also got our earth strap. So if you're wondering what this thing on the vehicle is, this is an earth strap. All engines need to be earthed. So this is running from the top of the engine block and down, and I've got it attached on this car to the body on this side plate, but there are many different places where you can attach that, as it just needs to make sure that it is actually earthed. And finally we've got our exhaust. As I mentioned before, two pipes coming out, one at the front here, one at the back here, and the exhaust then circles under and comes out the back here. So that was our quick tour around the 500 engine bay. Just looking at the components, what we have, where they are, what they look like, to give you kind of a view as to what we're dealing with and where things are in the engine. That will hopefully help us for later videos when we go on to explore those items in detail, when we go on to do servicing, dropping the engine, etc. So you know what things look like and you know what people are talking about on forums and in manuals. Thanks for joining me.